All right. So I'm tempted a little to start with a verse. I'm not quoting it verbatim, but essentially the idea of a verse from the beginning of Shankara's Viveka Chudamani. And it starts really by talking about, you know, kind of a like a like a bit of a stick to threaten seekers with a little bit. And it says, it's incredibly difficult to obtain a human birth and even more difficult to become an educated person, even more difficult to be exposed in any way to the spiritual, even more difficult to find in any way some kind of guru, all kinds of hurdles are there, each hurdle more onerous than the last. And if after having obtained all of those things, it says you don't use all your efforts to pursue spiritual liberation, then you're as much as committing suicide. So this is its sort of stick part, and then there's a carrot part a few verses later where it says, if you have decided to pursue the spiritual, then congratulations, you are the crowning glory of your entire lineage. It's all been leading up to you, and so but it's true actually. The Buddhists, I like this metaphor too. I have to say, I mean, forgive me, any of my students who've heard this before, but it's so perfect because the Indian imagination is, both the Buddhists and the Hindus is so vast, right? The Buddhists, some metaphor somewhere is, imagine uh, there's a turtle that lives in the ocean and it only surfaces like once every 100 years. And imagine there is like a ring, like a hula hoop, essentially, okay, that's placed somewhere on the ocean. And when by chance this turtle, which only surfaces once every century, happens to stick its head through this hula hoop, this is the chance of a human birth. So to get in your mind how rare an opportunity it is to have all these resources, basically. And the Gita says, right, even to wish to hear of the spiritual, even to wish to hear of it, already has taken countless lives of meritorious deeds. Even to wish to hear of it, let alone pursue it. So, this is just sort of to give you an idea of a little bit of urgency to use this precious time you have in this lifetime to pursue the spiritual as quickly as possible. Um, but what I want to do, is, and I feel like this is, what I want to start with anyway. I mean, we can go many, many different paths here. Is um, to really start by opening up the forum and ask you all, anyone who wants to ask, really, where you are in your spiritual journey, what obstacles you're encountering, what questions you have. Basically, I see the journey as essentially the journey, or not the journey. They would really, yeah, I guess you could call it the journey. Sort of the basic spiritual quest in sort of three parts, right? One is having some level of intellectual understanding of what we're pursuing and why. How much intellectual understanding is required depends on the person. Some people are lucky; they require very little, and they have a lot of faith. Other people, like myself, are very unlucky, and they need a lot of answers. It's all fine. We just have to go with where you are. So, that's sort of one aspect. Second aspect, which is probably honestly the vast majority of things for most people, is what they call purification of the mind, which is getting your attachments in order, in a unification of the emotional life, essentially, so that you have less mental agitation and you have more space to pursue the spiritual. And then the sort of leading edge, cutting edge part of the spiritual is, the sort of twinned, paths of self inquiry and surrender, which are really sides of a coin. And a little later on, I will go over those again because you can't really go over them enough times. But I will go over them again and we'll practice them together. But before I do that, I do think the most valuable thing, really, apart from silence and presence, is um, uh, what each of you have to bring to the table in terms of your own particular personal quest. I really believe that, the spiritual is something in some way that everyone has to, there's an individual puzzle that has to be solved for each person separately in a way. Even though there's a broad arc, it's true. But then the exact application of it is going to be specific to the person. So yeah, so I invite anyone who's questions, tell me, what's on your mind as far as the spiritual goes.
Hi,
You can
Akilesh,
ask
can
me
I
a question.
speak?
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, hi, I'm Thiago.
Uh-huh.
I'd like to share my journey so far.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so a few years ago, I had a private session with you actually, uh, and it's even funny because I mentioned that I really liked Surrender, and it was my jam.
Mhm.
And I always felt attracted by Taoism and Buddhism and the do nothing idea.
Mhm.
But after I had that session with you, I had another crisis of confusion and then I wanted to start over. And then I kind of naturally ended up doing self-inquiry. And that led over the next months to a lot of releases like fear, of anger, a lot of emotional baggage, let's say, like the existential fear. And for maybe more than a year, I kept having these. And from like 6 months ago to today, I have been in a new phase, kind of, that I wanted to talk about. So right now, I'm kind of stabilized again. I'm practicing self-inquiry.
Mhm.
I have noticed that I kind of forget more of practicing it. It's when I do it, it's lighter, but at the same time, I kind of get more distracted than before. And my theory is because I used to suffer more. I think I released some
Yeah.
suffering,
Right.
and that suffering used to make me remember I need to meditate, I need to self-inquire, I need to like that kind of thing. And now I don't have the same. I'm not in hell as much anymore,
Mhm.
so I don't get the same bursts of shock that I used to kind of maybe remember. I am enjoying more my days, and some other interests have sparkled that kind of caught my attention a little bit, apart from the self-inquiry. So I had to kind of realize that I was doing it in a kind of compulsive, kind of sick way, even like I have to solve this. I have to solve the problem of me. I need to do like a kind of I'm forgetting the word here, but like the word that Freud would use for someone who's trying to who is too caught up in his own mind. Like
Like a
um
neurotic or something like that.
sorry?
Like neurotic or something like that.
Yeah, neurotic, exactly. That's the word.
And so
Yeah.
you were doing self inquiry in a neurotic way. That's what you felt.
Uh, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Like to solve to solve like the deep suffering that I was feeling. I
Mm-hmm.
needed to do it 24 hours a day, and now I'm feeling less this need. So I had this period where I relaxed a little bit more. It felt very forced. Now I'm coming back to do it more often and like doing it because it's really my interest and my curiosity and my desire, not because you tell me that I need to do it to solve my
Right.
life or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, I had to face a guilt of not. Sometimes when I'm not doing it, I felt guilt like I'm not evolving spiritually, or if I'm momentarily I'm interested in doing something else like mindfulness. So then I started having thoughts like, oh, I need to do self-inquiry because self-inquiry brought me the results. So it's how I'm going to get there. and these kinds of thoughts of guilt and these are kind of neurotic thoughts that I'm dealing
Well,
with.
yeah. So there's right. So there's a correspondence between the spiritual and the emotional there. I mean, look, one thing you
Mm,
said strikes me, which is very true. It is. I mean, and Ramana says this, and others say this as well. That yeah, I mean, one of the key uses of suffering is precisely to get us on the spiritual path. And there's a great story that the Buddha, the Buddha, it's in the Buddhist literature somewhere, where the Buddha is teaching, and you know Indra, for those who don't know, who's one of the gods, basically, chief of the gods. Anyway, he hears about this, and he wants to go see what the Buddha has to say. So he goes down, and he asks the Buddha to tell him, how should one make himself realized. And the Buddha gives the explanation, and then Indra goes back to Indraloka, his realm. And later, one of the Buddha's disciples is like, I wonder what he did with that information. So he goes, and he has powers. I forget which disciple of the Buddha's this is, but he has powers to go travel to these other realms. He goes to Indra's realm, and he sees Indra there, and he says, "Well, hey, you got this amazing information from the greatest teacher. Did you follow the instructions?" And Indra admits, "Well, actually, as soon as I stepped back into my realm, the moment I set foot back in Indraloka, I forgot everything, because Indraloka is heaven. So everything there is incredibly beautiful. Everything, it's just beauty everywhere. So it's extremely difficult to maintain spiritual motivation when you're surrounded by total pleasure and beauty everywhere you turn. Anyway, that's the metaphor here. So I think that's what you're pointing to, which is there's a little bit of an irony there. And Ramana says too, Ramana talks about how in certain ways, like certain sattvic attachments, like to the scriptures, for example, are are hard to give up actually, because they're actually beautiful. These certain attachments to things like, you know, beautiful writing, beautiful music, beautiful ideas. And these are all good things, actually, not bad things. But they are, because for that very reason, almost more insidious than suffering, which is very obviously negative. Everyone wants to get rid of suffering, at least, at some level. So, yeah, thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Can I,
Yeah, please.
regarding beauty as a attachment or an impediment for
Yeah.
spiritual, I mean, I felt a little bit of discord when I heard that.
Tell me.
I just want some clarity
Please,
on it.
please.
Because one of the ways they describe divinity is like, for example, there's a Satyam Shivam Sundaram.
Yeah.
In other words, divine is beautiful. Wherever
Yes.
there's beauty, there is divine.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
why we perceive it as beautiful.
Yes.
So the pursuit of excellence in art, for example.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't think that's attachment or some that's a detriment toward spiritual. Would that?
Well, so there's a couple things I want to say to this. So first of all, you're right. You're absolutely right that the artistic, the experience of beauty very much is the divine. I think Ramana said this as well. He did beautifully. He said, um, the exact feeling you get when you look at the beautiful in art, at the Brahma rasa, the taste of Brahman, it's exactly that. So there is definitely a connection. Look, what do we mean by an attachment vis-a-vis the spiritual? What's the meaning of it? The meaning of it is that which distracts you from the practice, basically. So the question is whether or not this pursuit of beauty is a distraction or not. That's the key question. For some people, it may actually be helpful, because, especially at certain stages, right? Because, what moves you towards greater quietness of mind? For somebody who's like, let's say, like completely immersed in, I don't know, business and money and enemies and stuff like that. For such a person, for example, pursuing art would be like maybe like very mentally quieting. So it's actually in the right direction. So it depends on who we're talking about. But for somebody who is, wants to be extremely one-pointed on self-inquiry and surrender, it might be the case, not all the time, depends. It might be the case that it proves an impediment. It depends on where your mind is, basically. Is one able to focus on surrender or inquiry? And if one is doing that, then in surrender or inquiry, whatever other activities happen to occur. but that's not where the forefront of the mind is. The mind is on the practice. So that's what I would say to that. So it depends. But basically, right, see, look, of course, everything beautiful and good and true partakes of divinity. The issue is one going to be distracted by the crumbs instead of the cake?
So,
Go ahead, please. Huh?
so no, I just wanted to comment on the suffering piece.
Uh-huh.
So, like suffering being a prerequisite for making the practice, like he said, to remember to practice, making it deeper, etc. And then when the suffering goes out and you start, then you get caught up in whatever is. So that also is an attachment, right? So you can't be dependent on suffering all the time.
Absolutely.
You're attached. So
Yes.
this imaginary thing that, okay, during suffering, I remembered more, and therefore I was a sincere, seeker or a practitioner or something like that. Versus, so that also, right, in my mind is kind of, you're kind of, separating, right? I mean, you're letting it's an attachment that I'm attached to suffering, so my practice is deeper. And then, but who decides that the practice is deeper or, that is more sincere or what? So who's the one that's telling us, it is, No,
I mean, absolutely. No, you should not be dependent on suffering to remind you to practice. It just happens to be that suffering can be such a reminder. I mean, what should happen, right? What should happen over time is that as one goes deeper into the practice, one should become automatically, I mean, there's nothing you need to make happen. You should automatically become more sensitized to those periods when your mind is disrupted even a little bit, you see. So, it's like, the story like the princess and the pea. You heard the story? Like it's like a fairy tale, right? Where basically the princess is so sensitive that even though there's a single pea under 20 mattresses, she's like tossing and turning all night, because that's how sensitive she is. So when one is more and more sensitive, in a way, it takes less and less to produce the suffering, actually. Is a way of looking at it, actually. It's because any departure from the state of peace is going to be felt acutely. The more deep you are, the less it takes to feel that acute pain of separation, basically, from the divine. So, but yeah, you don't need gross suffering to do that, 100%.
So my question is, what do you mean by persist ritual? Because my experience right now is, so my number one question is, what exactly do you mean by persist ritual? If you can explain your.
Of course, 100%. Okay, so
question is, my experience. I wanted to share my experience right now is when I'm doing my practice or my practices, the multiple practices, I feel wonderful. I feel connected with divine. But when you go into the world, this is where the challenge starts.
Yeah.
So what is spiritual in this case?
Right. Well, okay, let me answer. I mean, these questions are connected, right? So I mean, I might as well. I'm going to go into the practices and just explain them. For anybody who hasn't heard them or needs a refresher. Basically, look, the basic spiritual quest, which is what's defined in Advaita Vedanta and other contemplative mystical traditions, although I'm most familiar with Advaita Vedanta, is that there is a fundamental illusion at work. There's an illusion at work. What is the illusion? The illusion is that I am this separate, experiencing, doing entity. And usually that this entity is connected or identified with the body and the mind, the person, okay? And the purpose of the spiritual is to pierce that illusion and reveal the truth. And what is that truth? The truth is that that's not what I am, or at least not the only thing that I am, that I am in fact something which is, you can call it by many things, pure consciousness, but it is basically something which is eternal, perfect, aware, beautiful, contains everything, immortal, right? This is the actual essence of things. And it's something that we can directly experience in some sense, with an asterisk. And so that's the aim. The aim is pierce the illusion. what keeps the illusion going? All the different projects of the body and the mind that basically compel the mind to move in various ways. So this illusion of that I am a person results in various desires and fears. Those desires and fears in turn make the mind move, and the mind's movement reinforces the illusion of identity, basically. So the basic idea behind the spiritual is weaken the attachments, slow down the motion of the mind, and examine very carefully what is actually happening. And when one examines very carefully what is actually happening, and when the mind is sufficiently slowed, which means the attachments are sufficiently weakened, then the illusion can be pierced and clarity can result. That's the basic idea. And so then we talk about, well, yeah, I feel wonderful when I'm doing these practices at home, but not when I go out into the world. And that's a very good point. And the reason you feel that way is because as soon as you go out into the world, then the illusion is in full effect and the mind is moving. Basically, it's movement of mind, agitation of mind that causes unhappiness. And that's resulting from this fundamental illusion. Because if this illusion is at work, then we feel limited, we feel subject to death, subject to loss, subject to fear, just subject to all these problems, basically, which we don't want. Like, I want something, I can't get it, keep trying for it, I still can't get it, blah, blah, blah. So, the practices that Vedanta recommends, that Ramana Maharishi recommend, that I recommend, are ultimately, beyond the intellectual understanding and beyond the purification of mind. They fall into ideas of surrender and self-inquiry. So let me just explain both of them really quick. So, because it's always worth a refresher. So self-inquiry fundamentally is just recognizing that right now, right here, there is a sense of your own existence. Like, it seems to be the case that you're here somehow. I am. I'm aware. Like, that sense. And self-inquiry says, okay, that seems so obvious, but suppose you start looking for that sense, like, yeah, I know I'm here. Exactly where is that sense coming from? Exactly where is it coming from? Like, look, where is that I sense coming from? And the basic fundamental rule is that wherever you look, you ask yourself a simple question like, am I aware of this, whatever that is? And inevitably, invariably, you are. And the rule is that whatever you're aware of can't be you. Because if it were you, then how would you be aware of it as something separate? Does that make sense? Sort of. Well, we can practice that and you'll see how it works. But essentially, right? So for example, many people might think, oh yeah, I am, let's say, I don't know, I'm in here, somehow in here, this in my head somehow, for example, right? And then they just ask themselves, well, this feeling inside my head, isn't that something I'm aware of? Yes. So I can't be that feeling because I'm aware of the feeling, in the same way that I can't be this table because I'm aware of the table. If I were the table, there'd be no separation between me and the table. So I wouldn't be able to be aware of the table as something separate.
But the question is, I'm
Tell
sorry to interrupt you.
Please.
I understand this, I had the experience of that witness state.
Okay.
Like I had this realistic experience, which was very powerful. But it's also my experience, my true self cannot function in this reality without this identification of the body and the reality. It's impossible because it's very different from this. So this is not an obstacle for me. It's a tool. This is how I see it. It's just a tool. It's just a tool for me to communicate with you.
Well, okay. I mean, it's it's not wrong to say that entirely. However, what I would say is the key question is, when you say like, I'm using this as a tool, who is I in this sentence? Who is the I making that decision?
Right. So it's a combination of a lot of eyes.
That's a problem because when I is looking, it's not multiplicity. Like I is singular. Like it's whatever. It's a question of what it is. Who is the one looking at this multiplicity?
Right, I understand your point, but my argument to you
Uh-huh.
is that my experience.
Yeah.
In order for me to communicate to you,
Mhm. You need this
process.
instrument.
It's not only I'm the source, I'm sourcing it,
Uh-huh.
but I'm using the mind, I'm using the eyes, I'm using the mouth
Uh-huh.
to convey it. So it's a process. It happens automatically,
Uh-huh.
but it's a process, and then I'm deciding to use the process or not to use it. Like
Well, who's deciding?
I, you know, the
See,
experiencer,
any
the witness of those
any-
situations.
but the witness, the witness witnesses. Where is the question of doing? See, when the witness says, I'm going to use an instrument, you've immediately created an image of some kind of entity that's picking up instruments and doing things. But actually, picking up instruments and doing things is a thought. It's a thought that's part of the instruments. So
Which is the thought which is created by the mind. So that this is like a little the thought is energy which activates this mechanism. So it can come here and
But so why would you say I'm doing it then?
well, the thing is that I need to use I or we. Then I can say
Well, no. That's it. No, see,
it's not only it's not a separate entity. This is what I'm saying. You know, like it's not a that separation that you're saying spiritual versus this and that. That's weird to me. You know, it's like because there is no separation of it. It's just this is one experience. This is another experience. You know, it's just happening. Like, you know, negative is one experience to trigger the other one. Positive is another experience. But we get caught up in that. We or I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to explain it.
well, no. I mean, the difficulty is I'm not exactly sure. See, what I feel when we're talking is that there's some kind of there's a disconnect of ideas in some way. But look, what I want to say is when you say, for example, I feel great at home, but taking it out into the world, I don't feel so great.
Right, but it doesn't mean that it's not spiritual to me. That's what I wanted you to say.
Well,
so what is spiritual? Because if you mean spiritual, staying, like that was my question to begin with. Right, because
well, so I'm arguing that there is a spiritual. I mean, I'm not saying that there's obviously different uses of the word, but the spiritual that I'm talking about is something which it's not limited. It's promising a perfection that is there in all circumstances.
right.
So, and the reason I'm suggesting that one feels a distinction between home and work,
Right.
let's say, or home and the outside world, is because of an identification that can, in fact, be pierced.
Right. So this is what my experience was, that when I do the practices, I feel perfection. When I go outside the world and I get upset, for example, I no longer would like to be upset because I'm understanding I'm seeking perfection in imperfect situation. But this does not mean it's not spiritual. This is my argument.
Well,
That
sure.
identification, that understanding that it's imperfect, feeling the negative emotions is just reinforces that this is not who I am, but this does not mean it's not a practice, it's not a spirituality.
I mean, again,
So
I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of different views of the spiritual, but I'm just saying the specific kind of spirituality that I'm talking about now. I mean, so look, and it's a long discussion, but essentially, right? And I don't know what your experience is, but the point is there a recognition? at least from the perspective of Advaita Vedanta, okay, the recognition is that I am not doing. And in fact, in truth, it could be even said that I'm not even experiencing. So there is a very subtle, mystical experience that's at stake here. That's the purpose of this game. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other views of spirituality that may not be valid in their own way, but that's the game that I'm talking about here.
Right, so you can say I'm not experiencing, but the body is experiencing because there is an experience.
Well,
I never recognize
well,
is that you
perhaps this is
disregard it. It's
well,
not realistic to me.
yeah, see that. So this question comes up, right? How can I operate? How can I operate, right? How can I operate in the world if I'm in this practice, right? These questions do come up, and the reason the questions come up about, well, how can I possibly operate in the world, is precisely because of the operation of this illusion. So there is an illusion that makes it seem like I have to make the body and the mind work in the world, otherwise they don't. I have to do it first.
My experience is not like that. My experience is that actually the body and the mind, it's just happening. They're just functioning based on something.
Okay.
But at the same time, and again, I don't know at which state I am. Like, I'm just sharing my personal experience. But at the same time, I feel that the reality is that I am whoever I am. I wake up in the morning. I need to eat. Of course, the body wakes up in the morning. The body is, but the thing is that if you separate these things, can create a little bit of confusion, in my opinion.
See, you need to separate it for a while because.
And then.
In what?
Disregard the existence of the body because, for example,
who's disregarding the existence of the body?
my understanding that I'm saying pursue spiritual.
Yeah.
It can be misunderstood in my mind.
Well, I want it to be. It's not a misunderstanding to say that we're drawing a hard line. So we are trying, at least in my version of things, right? I'm not saying it has to be your version of things, but there has to be. Oh, sorry, whoever that is could be possibly mute that. Sorry, appreciate that. Thank you so much. But yeah, look. So I mean, we could discuss this further, but essentially, so I hear what you're saying. You're saying, we're drawing a line between the workings of the real world and the spiritual. And yes, I am arguing for that for a while. There has to be a going inward for quite a while, where one is attempting to systematically disregard the rest of the world. Absolutely. And you'll see, it's not so easy to do. and you will be dragged back into the real world, whether you like it or not, for quite a long time. It's not so simple to snap your fingers and disregard the world. It doesn't happen like that. When one has sufficiently weakened the attachments that one is able to see beyond that, and when does that happen? I mean, one will know when that happens. Then this won't be an issue anymore. But for a while, that line, in my opinion, has to be drawn. Yeah. And let me explain the other practice while we're talking as well, right? So self-inquiry is continuously. And by the way, also, right, the way I recommend these practices, the way Ramana Maharshi recommends these practices as well, right, is that they are to be done at all times. At all times. So they're not just sitting at home type practices. They are everywhere, all the time, as your first primary focus of attention, right? I mean, again, easier said than done, but that's the idea. And it'll be seen. Does the body stop functioning? Try it out for yourself and see what happens. Does the mind stop functioning? Again, try it out, experiment, and see what happens. But so self-inquiry is one mode, and when one is looking for I, and one is encountering a series of objects from the body to the emotions to various other ideas that are in fact not I, because one is aware of them. The search for I becomes a like a heat-seeking missile, you know? It's a mode of chasing. So I don't like, generally speaking, even though some people talk like this, I don't love the idea of like resting in the I or resting as the witness or these kinds of language, because they suggest that there is some stopping point where I found I, now I can rest here. No, like anything which you think is I is not I. The real rest is perpetual motion. Perpetual motion is the rest. That is so that's one thing I'll say. Now surrender is the flip side of this coin. And what is surrender? Surrender basically says with respect to everything that's going on in the world and everything that's going on in your inner world, namely your emotions and your thoughts, disregard them all. You don't have to push them out of awareness. You don't have to shut them down. You don't have to repress them or suppress them or anything like that. You can allow them to be, but you should disregard them as unreal. You should disregard them as unreal. You should ignore them. And you should as well, I mean, I like to say these certain other things are all connected, right? One is you should refrain from using your willpower. That feeling that you have of like, I am going to do X. Anything, even something as simple as picking up a cup, right? The feeling of I'm doing this, I have to make this happen. That feeling, relax that feeling. So initiate nothing, basically. Initiate nothing. Only things that happen spontaneously, quote unquote, should happen, right? Second, I want to say, in terms of your attention, right? What you want to do is you want to essentially be continuously like waking yourself up. You should view all of this as a continuous dream, right? Whatever's happening in the outside world, whatever's happening in the inside world, it's a continuous dream, and you are continuously waking yourself up. Meaning, what you're basically bringing your attention back away from whatever's happening. Whatever's happening as a whole is one gigantic blob of experience, and you are summoning yourself again and again and again away from this experience. Okay. And I'll also add a third point here, which I haven't added in the past, but I do think it's relevant. These are all really, again, I'm almost restating points, and these are all connected. But I like the idea here of judgment. Yeah, non-evaluative, the sense that you have of evaluating something as good or bad. That you can view it as kind of muscle. This is helpful or unhelpful. This is good. This is bad. That muscle, just again, try to relax that muscle. That evaluative muscle. So that essentially you're kind of deliberately defocusing. You're defocusing on everything. You're defocusing. And then one last important point is, however, it's not a purely effortless practice. There's a lot of effort required. In both inquiry and surrender, effort is required. Effort is required to sustain the concentration involved in these practices. In surrender, what is the concentration? The concentration is to continuously wake yourself back up and remind yourself that this is all a mirage. So that's how you keep the fortress of relaxation guarded from the forces that would try to make you involve you, basically. So as you do this, as you do surrender, as you do inquiry, what will happen is you will first of all, you're going to learn a lot about yourself and your different attachments, because you'll find yourself dragged out of the practices over and over again. Whatever drags you out is a sign of your attachments. So you'll learn about that. But over time, right, you will start to access threads of peace. And those threads of peace are going to be what reinforce the practice. So the idea is, Ramana Maharishi said, it's like the horses or cows. I don't know how to use this, I forget to use it in metaphor. But instead of going out into the meadows, they realize they get their oats right in the little barn, so they stay where they are. But similarly, instead of the mind looking for happiness outside through this sort of circuitous, laborious route of sense objects, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go go find that person. That person's going to give me some amount of pleasure. Instead of that route, which is full of uncertainty and labor and effort, one can focus their attention inwardly and get that immediate sensation of peace. And that's going to systematically weaken the attachments to other things and increase the attachment to the practice. And the practice also has multiple things. One is it's giving you progressive amounts of peace here and now. And there's also the sort of far away, but there's a far away, but with an asterisk goal of liberation, which is piercing that illusion. And it's true, as people will have said, almost any non-duality talk, I'm sure you've heard this idea that you're already that, which is definitely true. And when one pierces this illusion, so to say, the revelation will be that there was no illusion. There's nothing to be pierced. There's no piercing. All this stuff, this kind of stuff is all true. Nevertheless, one must play the game. One must play the game until that point. So one must keep in mind that at some level, one is already that. Simultaneously, one is seeking that. This is the sort of paradox one has to bear in mind.
But one gives a bullock cart experience in the driver.
Tell me.
And a bullock cart driver, he'll be sleeping on the cart, moving the bullock cart. Bullocks will take the cart wherever it has to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So just like even whether he's awake or not, he's going to go. He's not driving the bullock cart around.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, so what needs to be done will happen automatically. That's 100% correct. Exactly. And that's the case, right? That's the truth is, right? Raman says all these beautiful metaphors for this. He says, the sense we have that we're doing things, it's like the monsters that seem to be holding up the temple, or the church, call little what they call them, sorry, what? Gargoyles, exactly. Thank you. Gargoyles, exactly. So it's a purely ornamental facade. That sense we have that we are doing things, that burden, but that's part of the illusion. So that needs to be weakened. The only way to weaken it is this way. So
Yes,
Any
I guess that was really nice that you mentioned. I guess I'm in the state now using your language where I'm practicing to relax that muscle of good and bad, just to relax it because to find more peace.
perfect.
That's my, I guess, practice.
Yeah,
now,
that's okay. 100%.
that's
Yeah.
why.
So it's a variant of surrender. That's great. I mean, that's great. Exactly. And so just as you apply it more and more and more, it's quite beautiful. I mean, surrender is such a beautiful practice. These are master practices. I mean, the actual practices really themselves, in a way, are so simple. Right? All the difficulty is caused by the attachments, the resistance to the practice. That's where all the complexity lives, basically. And that's where people have to troubleshoot because they're dragged off to one thing or another. Because there's huge fear and desire and things like that, and so it's a tangled mess, basically. So let's do some practice together first. Let's do it for a few minutes at least. So let's do 5 minutes together, and you can choose surrender or self-inquiry, and just and try it. And I often recommend people do it with their eyes open because it's more exportable into real life. But try it out, and then we can discuss.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh my God. Are you watching?
All right, just a reminder for anyone who's still unmuted, if you could please mute yourself, it'd be much appreciated on the Zoom.
Muted.
Were you muted before? What is this? You're on camera. What is
All
this?
right. Wait, on the Zoom, whoever's unmuted, can you hear me, Arnam? You're not. Okay, whatever. Anyone want to discuss their experience just now?
So,
Please. Uh-huh.
um, so in this self-inquiry, you keep separating yourself from whatever you are or whatever you are feeling. But it comes to a point that where does it end? Like
Yeah.
it's very it's like bland.
Well, that's fine. So that's very natural. See, so you're saying what happens is that you come to an impasse, which is very natural. But look, you notice even at that impasse or at that wall or at that blank, whatever you want to call it, you're still there,
Yeah.
right?
What is the next thing?
You keep focusing. I'm here, right? What is the next thing? Who's asking this question? I am, right? So when you say I, right, obviously it resonates somewhere, right? So look, this running into a wall is exactly what's going to happen. Now the issue is, nevertheless, you keep your focus and you keep concentrating on this. And can you hold it all the time? Because the basic obstacle to why it doesn't go further is the attachments. Your other attachments are the reason why it doesn't go any further. So what you can do is you can keep this at whatever level you're able to keep it at and bring it into the rest of your life. Does that make sense?
How is attachment coming
Because
when you're
when I say attachment, I really mean it's a broad word, right? Everything else you care about in life, anything else you're concerned about in life, anything else you're afraid of in life, these are all attachments. So there are parts of your mind essentially that say, we can't let you have clarity because you need to put food on the table, you need to like pay your bills, you need to like deal with your family issues, and you need people to think that you're a good person and blah, blah, blah. All these considerations, right? So there's parts of your mind that are actively saying, no, we can't let you have full focus all the time because you need to focus on what we want. So that as a collectivity essentially prevents, it's like it's like you're trying to open a door, but there's like 20 people with ropes tied to you who are pulling you back. So nevertheless, if you try to keep this practice going, keep concentration, and it will be interrupted. But nevertheless, you keep it. As soon as it's interrupted, you start it again and have to do it again and again and again and again and again. Right? You bring your attention back every time it's disrupted. You're going to, like I say, experience certain kinds of peace, and that's going to give you a kind of reward for having done the practice. And as a result of that reward, you're going to care less about other things in your life, which means those attachments are weakened. So this is a war between the part of yourself that thinks you're a person, you have person commitments, you have person desires, you have person fears. You need to be active and engaged and deal with those things, because otherwise, who's going to deal with them for you, right? So that part is at war with the other side, which says, well, maybe I'm not that actually. Maybe I'm pure consciousness. Maybe I'm have nothing to do with any of the things that need to be done. I'm totally immune to all of this stuff. But they're at war.
How do you, I don't know, you won't have to answer, but to yourself, but how, is it not like you're running away from that things come like,
Well, so
it is good thing, yeah, it's fine, you can separate.
yeah,
When there is problem where you need to go and solve it or do something, and you're doing the practice, isn't that feeling coming that you're running away from?
well, so I mean, it's a good question. So look, it's actually a subtle point. One thing I'll say first of all is you can't run away from something that you're not really part of to begin with. So the spiritual viewpoint is you're not involved right now. You think you're involved, but you're not. Right? There is sorry, give me your name one more time, please.
God,
Sorry?
God.
God, yeah. So Gaurav is there. Gaurav thinks he has these issues to deal with. And you are under the mistaken assumption that you're Gaurav. But you're not. You never were, you aren't now. So you have no control of what Gaurav does. You've completely mistaken yourself to be Gaurav, just in the same way that you could mistake yourself to be a character on TV. It's like a schizophrenic, psychotic delusion. So you don't have control. So there is, how can you run away? You're not currently involved. You're not Gaurav.
So the baseline is that
That's the baseline.
the reference is
That said, now there's a subtle point here, which is there is this thing, and everyone loves this word. I mean, whatever, it's a cliche now, but in a lot of these circles, it's called spiritual bypassing. You're familiar with this idea? The idea of spiritual bypassing is that people use the spiritual to avoid dealing with their psychological problems. Now, this can happen, okay? And the way that's shown is, it will make itself evident, because if you have certain psychological issues that you need to deal with, see, different things need to be dealt. Truth is, different things need to be dealt at different levels in a certain way. That's part of the mental purification phase of the process, which is, like I say, the vast majority of the process. So, just like, for example, if you were hungry, okay, you wouldn't. If you said, well, I mean, you can technically surrender and inquire as even when you're hungry, it's not really a problem. But if you were doing it in a way where you were really lying to yourself, essentially, and you were avoiding having to eat, it would show up, because what would happen is your ability to do the practice would be disrupted. So similarly, people have emotional issues sometimes. If they don't deal with those issues and they try to run away to the spiritual, purely running away, how that will show up is their practice they will not be able to continue the practice. The practice will stop. And they'll be like, well, why is it not working? And the answer is because you have to go backwards and deal with this other issue. So there are many cases like that happen. Even then, I would say that the person is still benefited by having done whatever practice they've done. But it is the case that, emotional things often have to be dealt with at the emotional level. It's true, just like physical things have to be dealt with at the physical level. And this is part of the mental purification process. So the Bhagavad Gita says, for example, right, like the spiritual seeker shouldn't eat too much or eat too little, shouldn't sleep too much or sleep too little, right? There should be balance in these areas. The Buddhists say the same thing. So, this kind of balance is part of the mental purification. If one is running away from harmony in these areas to the spiritual, it will become apparent because the practice will be disrupted and you'll have to go back and deal with it.
so you're saying the Swadharma or the body's intelligence will go and do that.
Yeah,
whatever is problem there.
usually it will, right? But sometimes people are, they don't want to look at this. They don't want to look at reality, and so they run away to the spiritual, hoping they can leapfrog reality completely, and it doesn't work. You see, that's all. They'll run smack into the hard wall that they won't have the motivation. You see, the energy, the motivation to practice will not be smooth. And they'll be like, well, why can't I practice? It's not working. Well, that's because they have to go off and deal with everything. Yeah.
Akhilesh ji, I had a question.
Sure.
So it's right along the same lines of the spiritual bypassing. So in Advaita Vedanta, there's a fourfold qualification, right? There's Viveka, Vairagya, Shatsampati, and Mumukshutva.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that in this path also surrender, self-inquiry, those are the prerequisites, correct?
Yeah, so you're talking about the traditional Advaita prerequisites for anyone who doesn't know, right? That the seeker should have all these attributes, right? They should start out with vairagya, which is a certain kind of detachment, a sense of the futility of the world, a certain amount of abstract intelligence, viveka, ability to sort of philosophize in a certain way, plus all these other emotional attributes of self-control, and things like that, plus a yearning for liberation. And I always like to say, like Ramana joked about this, like, probably no seeker with all of these attributes has ever existed. They're so onerous, this
Right.
level of qualification. So look,
But my question is,
yes, they should be. This is ideal. This is ideal
Okay.
to have these. Certainly, yes, it's true with surrender and inquiry. It is ideal to have all of these qualifications, but
wait.
No.
So let me finish
Sure.
my question.
Okay, sure.
So my question is that yes, you're right that no one. I mean, a seeker who has perfected all these qualities probably doesn't exist, in the sense that it's like an endless quest. But then, how do you know if you have done enough to merit being qualified to go on this path? And how do you recognize whether you are actually like how do you say it, like actually doing the practice correctly or employing these bypass techniques?
Right. So, I mean, the basic approach, I think things happen differently in the past. I can't necessarily speak with full knowledge about that. But I think essentially the approach that I take is that anybody who feels interested in pursuing surrender and inquiry is entitled to do so, and they can try it. But it's and if they're not quite fit for it yet, it will reveal itself to them. And even then it will be educational, right? So, it will be seen pretty clearly, like, I'm not able to sustain this, and then what do I do, right? So one thing I'll say, for example, which I haven't talked about, right, but this is a huge prominent part of what the Bhagavad Gita teaches, is something called karma yoga. So for those who don't know, what does karma yoga say? Karma yoga says, go ahead, do what you feel you have to do in life that you think is your duty, but try to do it with an attitude that the fruits of the endeavor are not yours. You surrender them, the fruits, but you do the duty as normal. That's distinct from surrender and inquiry, because in surrender and inquiry, you are directly attacking this idea that you have to do anything. Actually,
You're addressing the idea of being the doer itself.
That's right, exactly. So surrender and inquiry are more challenging to one's sense of self, because they're saying, who is it that thinks they need to do anything, actually? Versus karma yoga, which says, no, okay, you feel like you have to do something, go do it, but do it with this sort of attitude where you're going to have equanimity, whether there's success or there's failure. So my general approach to, are you doing it right? Are you qualified enough? Is go ahead, try this stuff, and experiment, and you're going to find out by experiment where you are and what you need. And anyway, everyone has to do this, in my opinion. Like, you kind of have to figure out where your particular barriers are. So, in some ways, probably most people are going to be engaged in some level of spiritual bypassing to some extent. And as they do the practice, they are going to discover these issues. I would certainly be open. I've recommended it in the past, in past years. I'm very open about my praise of therapy, and I'm a big fan of psychoanalysis. These kinds of things. I also am happy to say I think people would be wise to exercise, eat correctly. These kinds of balanced body things will also be helpful. Why? These are all dials you can play with to quiet the mind. Right? This is essentially about quieting the mind. Even the Gita, generally speaking, all the tenets of morality, okay, are all about quieting the mind, right? You provoke less conflict with your fellow human being. So that means you have less inner conflict, which means you have more space in your mind to pursue the truth, basically. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever recommended one of your students or followers to, have you ever like spotted that they're bypassing and they need to go seek therapy, or like how do you identify those
Time.
boundaries?
All the time. I mean, I recommend it all the time. In fact, I could almost recommend it as a universal thing. I mean, I almost wouldn't hesitate to say any serious seeker, go seek a good psychoanalytic therapist, you know, and maybe other kinds of therapies. I mean, I'm most familiar with psychoanalysis. I don't denigrate other therapies, but I'm a big fan of psychoanalysis. And so I could almost say it's almost universal. It's almost going to be universally helpful. Some people will need it, definitively need it, and that will be apparent again because the practice will stop. So when the practice stops and you can't figure out why, like I'm not doing it, I'm not proceeding spiritually, and I feel like I want to, but I'm not able to. It's just confusing. It's a mystery, right? That's an indication that something is going on unconsciously, and that's a red flag marker of some kind of need for probably therapy of some kind, because it's probably an emotional problem. It's probably
So on
probably
the flip side, how do they know that, okay, let's say they do go to therapy and they start working.
Yeah.
How do they know, on the flip side of it, how do they know that they are now ready to come back to this path? Like, do they practice? Do you recommend
Yeah.
practicing side by side? Like
Absolutely. Practice side by side, 100%.
Practice side by
Absolutely.
side. And then when you feel confident that you can sustain the practice, then you come back to it full time, like how?
Sure. I mean, exactly. It's exactly. You do as much as you can, precisely. And again, even in the practice, right? Like I said, there's different kinds of different levels of it, really, right? So surrender and inquiry, the most demanding, karma yoga next, right? But there are many, many other things you can do, in that range. Like, it could be something as simple as going to a temple. It could be listening to a spiritual discourse. It could be, even chanting something, a mantra, right? These are more, mechanical, but nevertheless, they have their purposes. So, something is better than nothing. And, we want to essentially create as much of a continuity as possible, right? So whatever you can do to fill in that line, some parts of the line will be more, subtle and kind of not as sharp as others, but still, if you're drawing a continuous line, that's good. And I would view the emotional work as part of that, really, ultimately. But 100% side by side, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Akilesh, I have one more. I have a question. Yeah.
Actually, hold on. If you hold 1 second, I think. Sorry, you had a question earlier. Sorry, I'll come back to you in a second. Okay.
All right.
So this is on the surrender technique. So you said you constantly have come back to the now.
Yes.
And I find that when I do that, the other part is that you disregard and you sort of let go.
Yeah.
And this constantly coming back, actually, I tend to, it is me, this body that is coming back, and hence it's again back to, taking control of your mind. So who comes back? And what I feel is that the body I is the one that's coming back. And so it's back to,
That's fine. Let it be the body, guys. See, I mean, basically, as long as you're able to keep saying whatever is going on outwardly and inwardly, and as long as you keep recognizing this whole sphere of stuff is illusion and not to be taken as real, and not to be an area for my efforts, and not to be taken seriously, right? That's what you're doing. Now, by the way, as you do this, see, what is this field of experience? And what is an identification, really? An identification is, at its heart, I take myself to be X. So when you take yourself to be X, really, if the identification is full, you will not even see it because you're identified with it. So you don't think of it as something separate. As you do the practice more and more, what happens is things with which you were previously identified become apparent as not you. And then they become something that you could see, like, oh, this was always in the field of experience, actually. I thought it was me, but it's actually not. It's something which is apart from me. So anyway, so this is also going to happen as part of that. So when you say, when you say it's coming back to the body ego, I mean, actually, in a way, yes. Here's another. I mean, there's multiple points I want to say here. Another point I'll say is both the practices of inquiry and surrender, right? You're not directly reaching in and being the capital S self. That's not what you're doing, right? What you are doing, because you don't have any experience of what that is. You're just told words about it. What do you have experience of? You have experience of your current I, which is the ego, is what it is, right? As one tries to bring oneself back, which is, you're correctly pointing out, is touching essentially the ego again and again and again, that ego is going to start losing pieces of itself, and it'll become subtler and subtler and subtler, just like an inquiry. It gets refined, just like an inquiry. And then the ego, which itself is put together, by these different pieces, really. If you strip away the pieces, the phenomenon falls apart, Like the Upanishads give the example of like a torch. What were we going to say?
Stick the fire.
Exactly.
Final.
Yes, precisely. Yes, exactly. So a torch that you whirl around and it seems to create a circle, right? Slow the torch enough, the circle disappears. So similarly, when the ego, which is attached to the movements of the mind and different pieces of the mind, when enough of the pieces are stripped away, the phenomenon of ego will disappear, and what will show up instead is what's really behind it, So yeah, it's totally fine. It is the body ego in a way, but that body ego will refine itself, and then eventually it will show what it really is.
Thank you.
Sure. And then, sorry, I'll come back to you one more time. So, did someone on Zoom had a question?
Yeah, hi. My question is along some of the other questions. So when you talk about surrender and all that, I understand. I've also been recently learning more about Advaita Vedanta and such. Intellectually, I get it, right? But then there's also my dharma, as a family man and as an employee, as this, as that, right? Certain duties that I need to fulfill. And when these two are in conflict with each other, because I can't completely unplug and say, all of this is illusion, then I won't be fulfilling my role in the context as well, right? So how does one reconcile those two?
Well, look, I mean, so what you're saying, of course, again, elicits the assumption that's at stake. What is that assumption? The assumption is, I am the person who's running the show. Whereas, the fundamental tenet of Advaita Vedanta is you're not running the show. You actually are not. What's your name?
Anant?
Anand, exactly. So you're not Anand. Basically, that's not who you are. Again, Anand is a character on a TV show, essentially, that you're watching from the audience seats right now.
I get these intellectually,
Yeah, but
right? Yes.
But you don't believe it, is what you're saying. That's why it's an issue. If you believed it, then this wouldn't be a question. See, it's exactly like that, right? I mean, I've given an analogy like this before, like a couple of years. I like this analogy. But imagine you're watching, Superman in a movie or something like that, like trying to save a bus full of kids, right? And you think you're Superman, right? And someone says, like you can get up and go to the bathroom, it's going to be fine. And then you say, well, what'll happen to the kids then? Do you see the problem? Like, you're not Superman, right? You're not the person in the TV show. It's because you believe you're the person in the TV show this is an issue, So, how do you hit that? Really, of course, that the illusion is very deep seated and exactly instilled in you this profound fear that everything will fall apart. When in reality, again, you're simply not running the show. It doesn't really matter. Things could fall apart whether or not you are pursuing the spiritual. Things will fall apart if the thing that whatever is running the universe decides what's going to happen.
It's not about wanting to run the show, but parents
It's that
have
you do
parental
not run the
duties and
show.
things like that, right? I cannot just unplug and say, "Hey, I'm going to follow a spiritual path. You guys just grow up on your own," right?
No. But see, but again, the argument is being made is you're currently not in control. Do you understand? You're
I
currently
agreed. Yeah.
have zero control. So the idea that you are deciding to unplug and this is going to have an effect, right? The argument being made is you have no effect currently. Right now, you have no effect. Do you see that? You think you're doing all this stuff. And the argument is no, you're doing none of those things right now. Zero.
So, but then going back to your Karma Yoga example, right? Krishna
Wow.
says, get up and fight the war. It's not just, he didn't say leave it to chance. You're not in control, right? So,
Okay, but I can refine. So there's a couple things. So again, why karma yoga? Karma yoga is because it's so scary to. I mean, it's scary for whoever thinks it's scary, right? The reality is obviously, I mean, if you follow my logic, the seeker is non-existent really in the way that we think. But nevertheless, right, for whoever I'm talking to right now, right, it's so scary to follow the logic of what I just said. Like you said, like, I'm a family man, feels like I can't just give up, blah, 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 right? So if one is too scared to follow surrender inquiry all the way just yet, right? Karma yoga is recommended in that particular case, okay? But as a stopgap measure, not as a final measure, okay? Because karma yoga will automatically lead to greater purification of mind, weaker attachments, and at some point down the road, greater yearning for liberation, and it will lead one eventually to pick up surrender and inquiry more fully, okay? But by the way, on the point of the Gita, right? Yes, Krishna says, get up and fight. But Krishna also says, at the very end of the Gita, he says, okay, I've told you all of this stuff. Now
do what
make
you
your own
wish.
decision. Now make
Yeah.
your own decision. However, he says, and immediately afterwards he says, however, if you think you're not going to fight, you are sorely mistaken. Because let me tell you, you're not in charge. He says, the powers of nature control your every move. God whirls people around like a machine. And God is in charge, not you. And trust me, you are going to fight. So it's not really a choice. You see, the choice it's just like a TV show. Like in a TV show, it's scripted, right? Someone has a big moral decision. Oh, should I do this or should I do that? Should I sacrifice this person or that person, right? It's a complete kabuki, There's no actual. Oh, sorry. There's no actual indecision. You see that?
Right?
Are we still on Zoom?
Okay, fine. Yeah, it is going on.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Somebody called probably. Right?
Huh?
Control.
Does that make
It's
sense?
not a visual call.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And Michael, if you get a question.
Yeah, I wanted to share something and get your perspective. So in the last year, my practice has softened significantly, and it raises a question that I want to ask. So I've been doing this practice for quite a while now. It was always very intense, like that new neuroticism that was mentioned at the start. Like I was fixated on, am I doing it right? Lots of doubt. That was kind of the main obstacle for me. But lately, that's kind of gone away. I don't have that doubt anymore. And there's been a change in the quality of my experience and my practice, which leads to the question I want to ask. But the thing that's changed a lot. So there's more pervasive peace now, like consistently. This sense that there's only one here and now, which we all are. It's like the single here and now, that all there is becoming more like thunderous. Like it's more the basic structure. And I just need to orient to that, which requires surrender. But anyway, and the other thing is that it suffers too much to suffer. It's like anytime I have to make a decision or do something or engage, even the practice, I want to ask you, it's too effortful. And I just have to drop. So at the start of my practice, it was all about doing the practice. The doubt would keep crushing me from doing that. Now, even this notion, I need to do it, I just drop it. So then you can say, well, then I'm doing the practice if I'm dropping it, but it doesn't. It doesn't feel like it. I can't just keep doing it. Like it's got to a point where it's too painful. But then it's like, wait, am I just not doing the practice now? But those two markers I said at the start of peace and the here and nowness, it's getting louder and louder. But I just can't keep doing it.
No, I think that's totally fine. Look, couple of things I want to say. One is, you know, that sense of doing it is definitely going to fade because you know, it's a very heavy kind of explicit thing at the beginning. But as you do it more and more and more, it's going to become naturally more natural. So the idea, your conceptualization of doing it as something separate, when it's becoming more and more your second nature, you know, it makes sense, you know. And what you're saying is well about you're moving towards greater peace, you're moving towards, you know, a sense of unity, automatically, it's all great. And I think Ramana actually said somewhere, by the way, anyway, interestingly enough, right? So the practice starts out effortful, and then it becomes eventually effortless, and then even the practice is taken away from you. That's the basic 3 stages he has. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. It sounds like it's in the right direction. I mean, basically, is the overall trajectory towards greater peace is a question you should ask yourself. It sounds like the practice has evolved essentially. And as well, I will say, right? I mean, the practice itself is a teacher. You have to trust that there's an inner guru who will instruct you if you do it, like how it works for you. Because as many words as I might say, as many times we have practice together, nevertheless, everyone has to, in some sense, discover the practice for themselves, you know, because these things cannot be fully described. And so, you know, you should follow your intuition. And it sounds like your intuition is telling you to move in this direction. So
yeah, this is actually super helpful because I haven't actually heard you articulate much, even the notion of the practice being let go of.
Yeah.
Because how I usually frame it is just keep going. And
well, it will automatically, like it's evolving essentially, right? So it's being taken in some sense from you. So, you know, that's what happened.
And that was actually quite unsettling for me. But that fear of, oh shit, I should keep doing it, had to be let go of, which was like a barrier. And it almost feels like to do the practice, I can feel that I have to identify to then let go of that. And it became a bit kind of circle.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But yeah.
I think it sounds like, you know, it's becoming, you know, someone gave an analogy once, like when you play the piano at first, you know, you play with your entire body. You know, a little kid plays with the entire body, right? And then later it refines, right? They play with their fingers, right? Just the very most essential things are used, right? It becomes far more efficient, you know? So the same way I think the practice evolves, because ultimately, what is the practice? The practice is what it is. Both inquiry and surrender are what they are because they are designed to essentially mimic the self, the true self. The true self is essentially in a perpetual self-inquiry, and it is in a perpetual surrender. That is the self, basically. The self is moving away from all particularities. That is its nature. So in some sense, it's happening. It is the case that it's happening effortlessly, you know? So you're coming closer and closer to that fact. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and one more thing I'm going to add is sometimes I get the sense maybe I'm not being vigilant enough anymore because I used to be like hyper vigilant to try. But even if I get pulled out now, usually I'll feel something just feels off. And then it goes back. But I'm not kind of preemptively stopping through what I was used to do. Now it's like once I feel the discomfort I drop, it's becoming much more sensitive to when that happens. But I'm not being preemptively vigilant as much as I was because that also feels a bit too taxing.
That's fine. Look, I mean, I would go in your case. I would go with what feels intuitively correct for the most part. You know, I mean, I am usually a very big fan of effort, but it sounds like you put in a lot of effort, and now it seems to be moving in a slightly more, like you say, like a calmer, smoother direction. So I would roll with it and see where it leads you. You know, you can always change your mind if it doesn't seem to be working at some point. But right now, it seems to be going in the right direction. I'll also say, right, you know, the practice, right, essentially what's happening is, and maybe this is your experience, is you are really educating the spiritual intuition. That's what's happening, right? And what is a spiritual intuition? It's something which is fundamentally unconscious. Thank God for that, so it can't be affected by the doubts of the conscious mind. So this part of you that sort of recognizes what is real is becoming more and more powerful, essentially, as one does as practice. And it is going to eventually sustain everything for you. That's the whole point of it. So you don't have to keep doing this doing thing, you know? the part of you that is becomes strong enough will do it for you. Will have that, and it's vigilant for you. You know, it will watch out for you. You know, so this is what's happening.
Yeah, I have a question. I feel like I'm getting more and more sensitive to things. So over the years, my practice isn't every day, it's sort of off and on. Maybe some days I'll be more disciplined. And then there'll be a phase where for whatever reasons, I'm not as disciplined. And of course, then, that sense of guilt comes. Because I know when I do it, I just feel better. I'm very much in the I, not the big, the small.
Yeah, sure.
Just to be very honest. But over the years, I'm finding myself becoming very sensitive to feelings and emotions, and literally, if somebody's talking over there, I feel like I get the sense that I already know what they're talking about, or good or bad, doesn't matter, but just extremely sensitive. And I don't know how to manage that. I don't understand how to.
Do you feel overwhelmed by it?
No, not overwhelmed. I mean, I can definitely, or it's like if something happened to me as a child and I never understood why that happened or what happened. Now, when I am, when I'm sitting, as in trying to meditate, sometimes the dots just connect out of nowhere. I'm trying to find something, it's right there in front of me. I think of something, it's like I don't, it's in some way it's a little bit feels like a little bit magical, for lack of a better word. But in some ways, I'm finding myself I'm very sensitive. I suddenly become very sensitive to, like what would be like, oh, it doesn't really matter. But now it's somehow, I don't know why, I should be stronger, but in a way, I don't think I'm making any sense. In a way, I do feel.
Well, does it bother you?
No, it doesn't bother me.
Because what I'll say is,
it bothers me.
I mean, because when you say how can I manage it, suggests that maybe some element of it bothers you. I do wonder when you say that.
Yeah, or maybe it does bother me. I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm asking.
Maybe it's sensitive. Well, here's what I'll say, right? I mean, one thing that happens when one does the practice is because one is vigilant like this, continuously trying to turn the attention inwards, essentially, it effectively, lowers some of the defenses of the mind. And what that means is you can get more sensitive in various ways, more sensitive to yourself, more sensitive to others. And it can bring stuff out of yourself that can be uncomfortable sometimes. So, I would watch that. And again, I mean, like I recommended therapy, like that could be, it could be something that could be helpful potentially. But it's, as the mind becomes quieter, right, as there's less noise, it makes sense that there's a greater sensitivity,
It does what?
It makes sense that there's a greater sensitivity.
Okay.
Yeah, and if there are certain magical things that seem to be happening too, I mean, you can take that as God's grace.
It's like, yeah, yes, very much so. Like before, if somebody was feeling sad about something, I would empathize and then I would back off. Now I feel it more.
Yeah, that's we're talking about his defenses going down. So that's what psychological defenses are. Defenses are things that are protecting you from emotional overwhelm. So when you do the practice, it lowers those defenses. And so to some extent, I mean, the more you do it, the more they're lowered essentially. And that can make you feel more, basically.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't know the feels.
Yeah, right.
Why am I feeling so? But it's like a sponge. Like, imagine a sponge.
Yeah.
You just suck in the environment, and I don't always want to be like that. You know, so it's a little bit.
Well, I mean, again, no, you might want to consider therapy seriously. Again, it's not, it's something I recommend to, I mean, as you know, I'm recommending it, recommend practice to everybody, you know, but really it's not a bad thing that you're feeling this, but it might be the case that you're, that you don't know how to manage it, like you said, you know, and it might be helpful to have some help with that, possibly.
It's almost like sometimes I know what's happening. I'm not watching, but I know what's happening behind my back. Not in a negative way.
No, sure.
Not very good stuff.
Sure. But just a sense of feeling.
It's very sensitive.
You might be more acutely aware of your environment now.
Yeah.
You know?
Listen, that was such a moment person.
Well, yeah. I mean, Ramana says if you pursue the spiritual path, you might have to be slightly insane.
Aren't these siddhis, Akilesh? I mean, I think these are siddhis. Right?
It might be. I mean, it depends. You know, perhaps. I mean, you know, we don't know. We don't. I mean, look. See, if you're capable. See, like, if the mind has protected itself against various emotions over time, it may grow like a thick skin, right? So, if the practice is lowering defenses, now the skin is becoming thinner, so to say, and more sensitive to the environment. You know, like the same Princess and the Pea kind of example, you know, it's just more able, like you say, to take in because the practice is basically distracting you from your usual ways of defending yourself. That's why, you know, there's a usual mental mode of like dealing with the world so that you're used to that keeps you in a kind of shell, a certain kind of shell. When you do the practice, that shell is being disrupted, you see.
I have one thing.
I had a question.
One second, I'll come to you in a second. Okay, go ahead.
So self-inquiry and surrender is one way to be in a peaceful state, right? For a longer time. But I see that there are other ways like doing chanting, meditation.
Yeah.
You go to deep samadhi.
Yeah.
Then as a seeker,
which do you pick and why?
Which to pick and another ultimate goal I believe is the same to achieve that.
Well, okay, no, not exactly. So yeah. So essentially, right, peace of mind fundamentally in any moment is generated by concentration. So concentration generates peace of mind. Concentration in anything could generate peace of mind. And so definitely on chanting of mantras or focusing on anything really, one can have temporary peace of mind. And this is, you know, this is overall a good thing, you know, almost any arena really. The difference between surrender and self-inquiry and these other ways of generating peace of mind is that surrender and inquiry are, they're not just ways of creating temporary peace of mind. They are also methods of discernment. So what happens is when you do inquiry and surrender, you are forced in both cases to distinguish one way or the other between I and not I. In self-inquiry, you directly seek I, and so you have to discard, keep finding this, you have to keep discarding objects of your experience as not I. In surrender, you say, everything that's happening, I'm ignoring. But what is everything? Everything equal not I. So you're forced to see not I. And like I said earlier, right, as you do surrender, more and more things that you previously regarded as I, didn't even see as separate, will break off and be seen as part of not I. So in both cases, what's happening is you're forced to make this, your mind automatically will be forced to increasingly refine its notion of what I is. That's different from all the other practices you talk about. That is the key difference, and that generates extra peace of mind, and also ultimately is going to be what drives through and punctures the illusion.
Peace of mind is not the goal, meaning it's
Yeah.
layam.
Right.
See, it's a layam versus mano nacham. Mano layam is what you're talking about.
Peace of mind peace of mind is helpful, but peace of mind is insufficient. Yeah, correct.
But
Yeah,
peace of mind is also experienced by the experiencer.
That's right.
Who's experienced.
Yeah.
So there's again
Yes.
a duality.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
so, and which is what self-inquiry, I think, is. to
yes,
get away from.
yes, exactly, correct.
But the goal, the end, you are blank only, right? Like, while doing self-inquiry, you hit a wall and you are in that state, and then you
And the blankness has to be
are
inquired.
in this consciousness where you are doing nothing. But in meditation also you feel the same thing, because after a while the thoughts and everything is gone, and you are in that state. So
Well, right, but see,
So
but
is it not the
like,
same?
well,
or is it different?
I mean, that part is the same, but the thing is, like I said, as other people are pointing out, right, you want to go beyond that. Right? Inquiry is asking,
Yeah.
who's aware of this blankness, right? And like I said, the blankness is being sustained by your attachments. So inquiry and surrender have a further advantage, which is they're to be done at all times. Usually these other forms of meditation are more specific to certain times and places, right? So all times means they're going to be something that burn the attachments again. And essentially, right, what really happens, right, if you're going to put it in a very rough trajectory, is you get to this impasse, you keep doing the inquiry, or keep doing the surrender, right? And attachments burn. Eventually you'll find at some point the barrier loosens for a second. Okay, what that means is that the ego illusion kind of breaks for a second. And if it breaks for a second, then you have a quote unquote glimpse, okay, which is it's a whole family of experiences, family of experiences of, essentially of samadhi, but of samadhi in a very particular key, which is the recognition suddenly, like, oh, that's what's there. I wasn't this, I was that, right?
So you transcend samadhi also in self.
Well,
Is the thing?
Well, in a way, so yes. So basically, you can view it as, what's a good way of looking at it? Like, if you, basically, see, technically speaking, even samadhi is an experience,
Yeah.
right? It's any glimpse in it, because it changes. Anything that changes is an experience. So at some level, right, you can view it. I mean, metaphors are always tricky, but like, you can take it as a mirror. Okay, it's a mirror analogy often used, right? So the mirror is very dirty. Okay, so purifying the mind is cleaning the mirror. Let's say this is one way of looking at it, right? And now the mirror is clean. It's a relatively pure mind, and it's beautiful, right? So if you're entranced in the beauty, you could say that's that would be relative peace of mind, right? And if one suddenly has recognition, like, oh, like it's almost but not quite a full knowledge. It's like a temporary flash of knowledge, right? It's like you're almost getting it, right? This is a glimpse, basically. You're getting it very temporarily, which is the same thing, right? But effectively, if you become, if you sort of see yourself in the mirror, right, and you really see the full beauty of that, so you can call that a glimpse if you want, the full beauty of your own reflection. But final knowledge is, this is a reflection of me. So you see, the point is, you shouldn't need the mirror anymore. So we're doing all this to produce the mirror. We're doing all this stuff to produce the mirror, and then to come to the point where the recognition occurs that this is an image. This is an image of me. Even samadhi is an image. It's a perfect image of the self, perfect pure image of the self. But you can't be dependent on generating that image, otherwise it's annoying. So it's
an infinite loop in the sense.
Well, it's not infinite loop. What happens is the loop is destroying the attachments. When the attachments are weak enough, clarity will occur.
Essentially, Saram Slokam 13 says that.
It says this.
What is it? Laya vinasane ubayarodhane lagatam punar bhavati no mritam. Meaning, mind control can be achieved through two modes, either through absorption abeyance, or through complete destruction. In the case of the first mode, the mind emerges again as it is merely absorbed in the void.
Exactly. So if it's a temporary, so those are the stages, right? There's blankness, then you can go past the blankness into a glimpse. And if the attachments are weak enough, then you'll have moksha, which is what we're looking for, liberation, enlightenment, finality, which is a contradiction in terms, like I say, because the content of that recognition is that the one who was seeking it never existed. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, you're still looking for that.
For a long journey, I was just seeing the
yeah.
point.
No, but you see the difference, right? There is definitely a difference. That said, right? I mean, these meditative methods, they certainly, if you feel like you cannot do inquiry or surrender, or you cannot do karma yoga, yes, chanting and stuff like that are still going to be helpful. So if they, what moves you toward peace of mind, even temporarily, is better than nothing. As a general matter. So yeah.
So peace of mind is an enabler or an instrument.
It's an instrument, exactly. That's right. It's like having a healthy body, for the purposes of doing some sport or something like that.
Don't get fooled by lion.
So Akilesh, I was just reminded that even in the Kriya Yoga traditions, which Yogananda and others had propagated, the breath and the significant component of the process, they actually said that the entire goal of Kriya is to create an after poise from where you can do the inquiry into the self. And then if you didn't do the inquiry after doing all of the Kriya, it's like preparing a meal and not eating.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Kriya Yoga traditions point to that after poise. So if you can get to the after poise without those practices, fine.
Exactly.
But I think someone like me, I need to do a lot of those to get a quiet mind, and then I do the self-inquiry on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
It's a two-stage thing for me.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, inquiry itself, right? Inquiry itself, surrender itself are, will themselves also, they're both, right? They both give you the final knowledge, and they also weaken attachments. However, it's they may not always be the best attachment weakeners depending on the particular person, their particular situation. Like someone might need Kriya Yoga techniques in their particular situation. Yeah.
So, I mean, my experience it's been about 2 years now. And it kind of echoes a lot of things that I heard. Once, when it is forced, initially it was, I have to practice, that doership, like now in hindsight, that time it didn't feel like doership. Now in hindsight, it feels, after this process. And then the other thing that, in addition to all this, like mind purification techniques that you have to use, dropping off, like just understanding my personality, dropping off some of the external activities, decreasing some of the external activities, right? Create, was a tool for me to create some space. Then the other thing is once, if it happens, then someone told me, don't force it, right? So if then it's coming in the way of Parayanam, like the chantings, and it is coming in the way of, Ramanajali Sangeetam, and, all kinds of reading. So then it is just creating, so the evolution, and so kind of letting go, I guess that is an indirect surrender practice. It has been, evolving on its own without me, forcing it, so that, but it's in the 2 years, that's my thing, and whether I'm sincerely practicing self-inquiry or surrender or anything, I have no idea, but things are
been happening.
Yeah. Yes.
That's beautiful. I do think that is what happens, right? The Gita and many other texts say that any seeker starting on this path will be carried forward, whether they like it or not, actually. So, it makes sense that you're being carried forward that way. Again, right, it's interesting, right? I again am a firm proponent, generally speaking, of effort. But, that said, right, it is interesting. I do think that's, it's not an absolute universal rule. And people do have to figure out things for themselves on this point sometimes, because for some people, like you say, like this sort of putting in forceful effort could resonate with certain psychological things within them where are gonna want to rebel against that. Like, I'm, like people have, for example, often, they often have a part of themselves that's obedient and a part of themselves that's rebellious, right? So if it's framed as you must do this, right? The part of yourself which is like nonconformist and rebellious, be like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? And then you have a conflict about that, right? So sometimes it may be wiser to take the path you're taking and sort of allow it to just evolve more naturally, so to say. So that's a
So
case
the
by case
willpower
basis.
was needed for decreasing the external commitments.
That's great. Yeah, that's
And so
interesting.
you do
That's
need to, the
interesting.
effort
Ah,
has to be
interesting.
put on, because
Interesting.
your inherent, tendency, my inherent tendencies was to gravitate towards more and more and more activity, that felt,
Yes.
so the effort had to be put
There.
in very intentionally, slowing, cutting down external activity.
Very
So
interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Question is what Bhagavan says there are three things required to realize. One is God's grace, second is time, third is effort, but he didn't say what effort means.
yeah, but grace comes in different ways. I
Yeah,
mean,
everybody
as
has
you
grace.
step away from your own self, that grace, you will just notice the grace the way it comes. Yes.
Everybody gets grace. Like he said, he ruled out grace, right? Everybody has grace. It's up to you to look
Exactly. And you have to clear the path, to recognize everyone gets the same quote of grace, right? I mean, you just have to see if you're putting, like blocks,
No, like
Yeah,
a lot of efforts in different things you put in, then it becomes effortless to effortless.
Right.
Really, lots of glimpses come. So you do lots of all these years of practice, everything, and suddenly you feel that you don't have to do anything, you get it back.
things just happen.
Well, no, it's interesting. I like what you said about, that you put in deliberate effort and you eliminated certain external distractions. It's interesting. So effort has to come in some place, basically. Different people come in different places, I guess.
And you can't measure the other thing that I've learned in the 2 years. I mean, I've been doing other practices way before I got into this. It is so you have to stop putting milestones. I mean, the personality that, so you can't say, oh, I'm making progress, I'm making by certain, so there's no specific trajectory, that it follows. So again, you have to surrender, that there is no trajectory. I mean, so again, that needs effort.
I think you're figuring out what is working for your particular psychology, which is wise. And that's great. And you're because I think there's certain natural stumbling blocks. You want to you have a certain personality where that would be a problem. And you're like, no, don't do it that way. That's smart.
Each individual self is so different.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly.
Unless you yourself.
Sorry.
That's
But I just wanted Akilesh's opinion on something I was recently reading about Osho. And Osho was describing the difference between yoga and tantra. And he says yoga, you go through this process of disciplining and yourself, which is, of course, I think he's referring to the yamas and niyamas and discipline. And tantra is actually embracing all the attachments you have, but he said with awareness.
Right.
So awareness is experience is tantra, yoga. So the proponents of tantra look at yoga as a sort of a starvation. So I was wondering where you think the self-inquiry path, right? I think certain teachers would say, hey, if you have small indulgences, do it, but do it with the inquiry more, right? So if you're, let's say you're reaching to a glass of wine, you could be doing self-inquiry as to, hey, who's picking up and you could do that converting into a practice. Or you could do the yoga path, yama, saying, hey, I do it. What is your experience and what would you say, and what was your path?
My usual advice on this point, right, is that I think it's easy to say, difficult to do, which is basically that this. My general feeling is that one should try to identify and be as honest as one can about one's deep desires. So deep desires, I don't think you can really defy them. I think what you can do is be dishonest about them, and that's a problem. So if we can be more honest about what we really want, not what we wish we wanted, be honest with the state of actual emotional truth, that's going to be helpful for sure. Now, so I don't think it's wise to go against that really. And it's also not necessarily so easy to know what that is. And again, therapy, because sometimes there are obstructions to knowing what it is. Like we may not want to see ourselves in a certain light. So we don't accept that we actually want X. But only when you want X, if you do want something deeply, okay, then you're much better following the so-called tantric path in that sense and doing it with awareness because you're not going anywhere. Basically, if it's a deep desire, you're not going to get rid of it just by ignoring it and burying your head in the sand. Okay, even if it's small and it's relatively minor, then you might get away with being able to just dispense with it. Most people are not going to be able to do that with bigger things. So that's my general feeling. As far as yoga versus tantra generally, right? I mean, I would say, this is a personality dependent thing, right? Just like, for example, right? So Ramana is known for saying, and I totally agree, right? You do not have to go to a monastery and become a sannyasi to recognize the truth. However, it's also true that for some people, this is helpful, So it depends on the person, So.
I think Arthur Osborne in his book, mentions, the in My Life and Quest, he mentions, right? So he was very fond of, he was doing the practice, but he couldn't give up his smoking. He couldn't give up his non-vegetarian. So he would go to, like from Tiruvannamalai, wherever he was working, he would go every Wednesday or something, he would go have his non-veg,
I see. Okay.
But then as the practice deepened, without his knowledge, things just fall.
Yeah,
He gave up, all this, whatever meat.
So it was
eating.
effortless, the dropping.
Exactly. And he says in that, right, that, so you can't force it, but then when, like the practice deepens or whenever, it just
Yeah,
spontaneously.
exactly. Move where you have the ability to move, essentially, and admit what you have to admit. That's what I would suggest, right? That's that you will make progress that way automatically. Exactly.
So this to Dr. The same lines as what I was saying, right? Like you said, you have to follow what works for you. For me, I found that when I went away from my home for a retreat, that was the time when I had my best experience. Because I guess when I'm back home, all these attachments of I have to do this and I have to do that
Exactly.
kind of draws me back.
Yes.
And you started off very nicely saying spirituality is trying to always do that inquiry.
Yes.
And get rid of your attachments.
Yes.
So those attachments are stronger and under certain circumstances.
Of course,
but
they are.
It weakens when you're different.
That's right. So again,
Me.
no, that's I'm sure that's not just true for you, for many people. And so, again, right? So I mean, it's only an attempt, right? First of all, we want to try to do these practices or any practice, right? Like I said, right? Surrender inquiry are just the hardest ones. You can do an easier practice at any time, right? And try to create some kind of continuity. But also, I will say again, right, on this point, right? So retreats are a very good example, right? Because, my bias and my feeling what Ramana said as well is, again, trying to do this all the time. However, again, right? This is a person-specific thing, right? Because so Ramakrishna, for example, said very specifically, he had this idea like, when a spiritual seeker is new, they're like a very, very young tree, and their roots are not very deep and they're very vulnerable. So better in that situation to go off and go to some kind of retreat or go to some place away from your usual attachments and nurture the tree, and when it becomes strong enough, then you can expose it to the elements, basically. So, I think what you're saying is, this is working for you, which is great. And so again, you're noticing what you personally need to move in the right direction, which is great.
But when Ramana was alive, a lot of people who come and stay with him for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and before going, they take leave of him. They were very sad. They don't want to leave.
Exactly.
Then they say that, what should I do? He said, what Ramana's advice is that it's all your mind.
Yeah.
Your mind is playing tricks on you. Wherever you go, you're going to go there. So whether you're here or anywhere, it's the same.
Yes.
But Ramana was there, so that's why it was peaceful.
Exactly.
As soon as you go away from him, it goes away. What to do?
I mean, look, Ramana's viewpoint, as I'm sure you know, right, is, if it's your destiny to have stayed at the ashram, you wouldn't even be asking me this question.
No, they had no choice. They had to work, right?
There's always a choice. There's always a choice.
Also, I wanted to share something. I don't know what I wanted to experience. I've heard that sometimes it's the grace that the karma of a person is so heavy that the grace of God is to put them in ashram because they will not survive in the world because their karma is so heavy.
Oh, quite possible. I mean,
So it's not like necessarily that the ashram is the perfect place. Actually, it's a shelter. For example, if the person is sick, you need to send them to the hospital because they will not survive in the world. Someone will need to take care of it. So I've heard this theory that sometimes the karma of a person is so heavy that they are outside the world, they will be drugged or they will be influenced, they will be killed, they will not continue the spiritual journey because they have the desire, but they don't, they have a very heavy karma. This was something that was told to me.
Could be,
but I'm
could
not
be, could
sure.
be. It's possible. I mean,
So it's not
but
necessarily
for some
the
people-
in the ashram are the, you know, it's a different individual.
different reasons for being there.
Exactly.
Sure, I'm sure people land up in the ashram for all kinds of reasons, and it could
Correct.
be that some of them have this
But
situation.
I also wanted to share something that in deep inquiry, and I wanted to kind of reference if this is truly my understanding is correct. So in deep inquiry, I was questioning myself, why am I sensitive to these things? Like, why am I so sensitive to this and that and this and that? And then answer came to me that actually the sensitivity is nothing but a body trauma. Body, it's a trauma stored in the body or in the mind. It's stored somewhere. It's not mine. That's why I'm sensitive. So the sensitivity is it's a alert that there is something I need to clear. There is some kind of trauma stored.
That might be the case. That
I
might very well be
know.
the case. Well, it's a little bit like what I was, so can we name one again, please? Sorry.
My name is Rukma.
Rukma, yes. So what Rukma was talking about her sensitivity as well, right? So that there's a, yeah, absolutely, right? So as defenses go down, you might be experiencing certain things that otherwise you are unaware of. And you could classify it as trauma if you'd like.
It
But
just came to me.
yeah, it's quite possible.
And then another experience I want to just reference with your experience was because in self-inquiry again, in deep meditation, it was difficult for me to reconcile the idea that I'm not the door. Because deep inside me, I felt I have a free will. And then I was inquiring, and then through meditation and then conversation with people, retreats, some answer came to me. But again, I just want to cross-reference it. So actually, my free will was before I jumped into this lifetime. But it was actually before my free will was I decided the big me or the soul or whatever it is, I have no idea who, that I want to experience this or I want to improve this or I want to not improve even, it's not improve. I want to just have experience of these situations. That was my free will. But now when I already jumped into, I guess, vortex or something, it's no more free will because I already chose that. It's like a movie. I already bought the ticket for the movie.
I mean, look,
I don't know if this is
these are metaphors. These are metaphors, I mean, look, so, from the pure spiritual aspect in my book, anyway, these questions about what happened before birth, reincarnation, did we choose the life we're in, et cetera, these are all, technically speaking, in the realm of illusion.
right.
So we can't say anything definitively about them
Correct.
from a pure spiritual perspective. So I can't really confirm or deny what
Correct.
you're saying. If that makes
So
sense.
it could have been just imagination, maybe like
It's a way of looking at it, sure. It's a way of, and if it helps you that way of looking at it, then it's good, what I would say.
I was not sure because, like I said, there is no proof of it. Yeah.
Exactly. See, basically, right, from the pure spiritual viewpoint, quote unquote, right? One cannot say anything about these matters, basically. There's who's asking? This is the immediate question will come up, and when the I is deeply inquired into, the mind stops. So there's no further movement after that. So yes.
That's pretty.
I just wanted to share something about the ashram and stuff coming up. So I actually been living in the ashram until a month ago. And when I first moved there, I thought I need to be a renunciate, I need to give up everything, I need to stop seeing friends, like very intense. And in the first few months, so much loneliness came up that I had never experienced before. And it was actually distracting from my practice. Circumstances presented themselves. I had to come back to do a visa refresh. And I saw a friend like once a week or something, and my practice was so much sharper. And I had to learn that for me, I need to have moments of being completely renunciate and then being in the world, and too extreme one or the other wasn't useful or helpful.
Exactly.
And it was like, wow, it's okay to be social.
Exactly.
I had never been told it was okay
Yeah.
on this path to be social, and it completely changed my practice. So,
That's
yeah.
great. It's great that you recognize that.
Mhm.
All right, so let's just close this out with 5 more minutes of silence, and then we'll continue this tomorrow at so there's a 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock meditation in the morning, and then tomorrow evening at 7 to 8:30 p.m.
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, so that's 5 more minutes of silence or practice. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
No, eat food now.
Yeah.
See tomorrow, it's time to go.
How do we have?
Okay, see you. Yeah, there's some. Yes.